Thank you and welcome to Through the Door, the insider's perspective on running a business. I'm Megan Comfort, small business manager at Nevada State Bank, and this is a podcast where we interview business owners and business leaders in the state of Nevada and get to learn from their stories, battling challenges, overcoming obstacles, and making big decisions along the way. So today, my guest really needs no introduction. I have Governor Lombardo here. You may also know him as our former longtime sheriff, managing Nevada's largest law enforcement agency with a budget of $1.3 billion and overseeing 6,000 employees. Today, as governor, he leads the state budget at $28 billion and oversees 45,000 employees. So thank you so much, Governor, for being here today.
Well, a couple of clarifiers there. I'm not a business leader.
Yes, you are.
Said, for all business leaders. I have an effect on business.
Yes, but I would say you are. I mean, an organization that's actually responsible for running a budget and the livelihood of many people, like, wouldn't you say that constitutes as some level of business, right?
Yeah. That's how you kick off the podcast. Right?
Yeah.
Explaining that.
I know. I love it.
And the other thing is it's more than 28 billion. It's 48 billion.
Oh,
in
wow.
totality, because obviously, approximately 50% of our total budget is funded by the federal government.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially
So, yes.
Especially in the healthcare space.
Yeah. So. A very needed space, actually, for us. So we typically start these podcasts off by learning a little bit more about your origin story. So kind of how you landed here in Nevada and your journey through ultimately landing as governor for the state. So I know that you came from a military family from overseas and started living in Las Vegas sometime around the 70s. So tell me a little bit about those earlier years for you.
Right. So to give you a little more clarification on that, my dad was in the United States Air Force, so basically a military kid. I was born in Misawa, Japan, and we bounced around Europe and the United States. Traditionally, back during those times, military families moved between 3 and 4 years. I don't know what the scheme was for that, but that's what occurred. That's how we ended up living in so many places. So via Madrid, Spain, to Las Vegas. So that occurred in 1976. I attended Rancho High School. So when I got here, I was entering my freshman year of high school.
Oh, wow.
And so he got assigned to Nellis Air Force Base, and the most proximate high school from that vicinity was Rancho High School. And upon graduating high school, I went into the United States Army, and then I deferred my enlistment. They were able to give you a deferment after you had been in if you wanted to achieve a college degree and attend the ROTC program. That's the Reserve Officers Training program, which I agreed to at UNLV. And so upon graduating college with a civil engineering degree, I had an obligation back in the military to return Fort Knox, Kentucky. And then I separated from the military and entered the Nevada National Guard upon my return to the state of Nevada.
Okay, so you were in the National Guard in the state of Nevada. How many years did you have to serve in the military after graduating?
Oh, in totality, I was in approximately 8 years. 2 of that was in inactive reserve capacity. In other words, you're still obligated in case there was a draft or, a call to service. And I completed that through the inactive reserves. So you still hold the title and the responsibility. You didn't have to do any training, but the active training piece was approximately 6 years.
What were some of the things that you learned in going through that experience that you still maybe carry with you today?
Right. So, I said my dad was in the Air Force, right? And, when I told him I was going to enter the military, obviously he wanted me to join the Air Force, but UNLV didn't have an Air Force ROTC program. It was Army. So it was just easier, a little more seamless to operate in that fashion. And, in the military, you could equate it to discipline, right? Self-discipline, discipline amongst your subordinates and your employees, per se, your soldiers, and, the build out of the early iterations of your leadership skills. You lead from the front, lead by example, and inspect what you expect. In other words, if your subordinates are telling you they're doing something, you should pay attention and confirm through the process. So those were early development pieces in management and leadership.
So then after you came back here, you joined the Las Vegas Metro Police Department.
Correct.
In the 80s. Was that
1988?
Was that what you thought you would be doing, like when
No,
you had that
obviously
civil
not.
engineering degree?
When you go in so I worked as a civil engineer, actually as a mechanical engineer in Garden Grove, California. So how did I end up in Garden Grove, California? The young lady I was dating at the time was attempting to make the U.S. Olympic team, and she was training at the Santa Monica Track Club.
Training for what?
The heptathlon.
Okay.
So the men are in the decathlon and the women are in the heptathlon. And so I ventured out there with her and her goals. And so I got a job at a mechanical engineering firm out in Garden Grove, California. We lived in the Santa Monica area. So I had to travel back and forth on a daily basis while she, tried to reach her goal of being on the Olympic team. And unfortunately, she didn't make it. They take the top 3 athletes, and she qualified 4th. And with that in mind, I said, well, what am I going to do with my life now? It was too expensive to live in California, and I didn't see a little vision, ability to have a quality of life out there in perpetuity. So we both decided we would come back to Las Vegas. And during that transition piece, she had applied to the Clark County Fire Department, and I applied to Las Vegas Metro. And that was never in my vision, my life vision, to be a police officer. But I had a few friends that I graduated college with that had entered the police department, and they invited me to go on a ride along, similar to what you described you're going to do here in the short future. And I was hooked. I wasn't enjoying being a junior engineer. I still had to qualify for my stamp in order to document or certify documents. And I was like, this seems a little more exciting. So to the chagrin of my parents, who helped pay for my college, they were a little surprised I wanted to be a police officer.
Yeah, that's a big change from civil engineer to police officer. What really drew you to that? Outside of the excitement, were you worried about the danger of that type of role? No, I
think it's more cellular than that. I think obviously that would be the danger, the adrenaline. Yeah, that's part of it, the adrenaline and the excitement, being outside, not behind a desk, but more so is what you learn from the military. Growing up in a military family and then being in the military yourself is a life of service. Right, providing the protection of America, the nation, and then the service piece is making a difference in individuals' lives that are suffering, become a victim of circumstances, or suffering other unforeseen circumstances in their lives, and the ability to help them through that process.
So tell me more about kind of how you ended up moving up through the police department into different management roles. When you got in, did you see yourself as eventually moving into a role like sheriff?
No, absolutely not. And that's a quick answer, right? Absolutely not, because it's honest, man. I'm being frank with you. So as you progress through life and you deal with the different responsibilities of the jobs you signed up for, and you realize, hey, maybe I can do a better job at this, and then you'll have some supervisor that has confidence in you and say, hey, I'm going on vacation. I want you to be in charge while I'm gone. And then you expressed an interest and the ability to do that, and the confidence to do things like that, to lead people, and make sure that what the taxpayers are paying for, that the people that are under you are actually doing that job, and the proverbial bang for your buck kind of thing, and responsibility to the taxpayers, and responsibility to the mission statement of whatever organization that you are participating in. And I started to get the bug for, first management, and then eventually into leadership, And they asked, well, what's the difference between leadership and management? And it's real simple. Management, dots the I's and crosses the T's and does checklists and all the stuff. And leadership is providing some vision for the future. Vision, how you could better be more efficient and more effective and program it, programs that would better benefit to what you're trying to achieve as an organization. And so I got that bug in short order. And so in the police department, and every police department's a little bit different, but here at the Las Vegas Metro is you progress into, everybody starts off in patrol, and that's the black and white car and customer service kind of thing, responding to crimes, critical incidents. And then if you want to move up into management / leadership, you got to take a promotional test, and that's sergeant, and then eventually it's lieutenant, and eventually it's captain, and then it's a deputy chief, and then it's an assistant sheriff, an undersheriff, and then sheriff. And so through my career of 26 years, I progressed through each one of those stages.
I love that you talk about leadership has a vision. And so you obviously saw, I can actually add to this and I can help contribute to some of the issues or gaps that I see being in the roles that I am, and I can start helping curate that vision. What did that look like at the time for you when you were like, yes, I have a vision and I want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to try and instill that in what I'm
it's
doing?
Easy to quantify in police work because, you respond to, so the acronym we use in law enforcement is the SARA model. So, you scan what is the actual issue, you analyze it, you respond to it, and then you assess it. And in that case, it was responding to, it may be a crime series. It may be a specific time of day or night that robberies are being committed in the small business environment, and the deployment of your resources to affect that particular issue. That's when it hit me, because, the proverbial always responding to the same locations. Here we go. We had another burglary occur here. Let me go take an onerous crime report, and then nothing ever comes of it. So just the dog, wagging the tail wagging the dog, in that vicious circle that you don't really see anything accomplished other than taking a crime report and becoming a statistic. And so we got to do something better in the process. And that's where, and then when they give you the autonomy, whoever's above you gives you the autonomy to do that, you act on that. And, and one of the biggest motivators in the human genome is recognition for a job well done, right? And that's what would occur from that process. So
when you were sheriff, or honestly in any leadership role, but since we're on the topic of kind of your career in the police department, a lot of times you have to have other players, right, in your office that are going to see out and carry through the vision all the way from the top down.
Right.
How did you go about that? That's one of the bigger issues for a lot of leaders, is really making sure that top level vision gets deployed in the right way through all the different levels of the organization. What were some of the tactics or things that you learned?
Well, what I would use is quite often is it's team building. It comes up to team building. So you have the ability to pick your team. Okay, in some organizations you can't. They have to be promoted through the process, and you have to utilize those individuals. But you do your research, identify the people you think would best support and implement your vision. So you pick your team, you give them a modicum of training and direction and understanding what your vision is, and then get the hell out of the way. And the reason why I say get the hell out of the way, because they got to be able to implement, and you have to give them the autonomy to implement. And the last A on that SARA model is assessment. So is your vision and your assessment of the problem, is it working? Is it working? And, and there's nothing worse, there's nothing more that an individual employee despises is micromanagement, right? And you have to have enough confidence in your ability to pick your team and provide them direction to prevent the micromanagement piece. But it's not an absolute, right? You have to follow up on your direction and see if it's being implemented as you intended. If not, you got to provide them better direction or maybe better training. And I think that's the best way to approach it.
Did you have mentors that kind of taught you that Sarah model and kind of just making sure that you utilize that as part of a foundation? I love the acronym.
Yeah,
use.
so I had two really influential people in my life, in my police career, and that was the former Sheriff Bill Young. He was a really operational kind of leader, let's go out and kick butt and take names and solve problems, right? And then so he taught me how to lead from the front. And then the second one was Doug Gillespie, who was a former sheriff too, and he was more pragmatic or programmatic, and like the Sarah model, and he was really concerned about effectiveness and efficiency. In other words, let's not just waste our time and money and effort for something that just probably doesn't make sense. And is it really a problem, right? And that's the Sarah model. When you talk about you scanning and then you analyze that data that you receive, and it could be in any business. You can equate that model in any business form. It doesn't have to be crime basis, right? Foundational. And he taught me those systems and the ability to evaluate the systems and analyze the systems. And Bill Young was more into the people part. Every functionality, every small business and everything else is service oriented, and whether your people are interacting with the customers appropriately. And you soon learn as a leader you can't be all places at all times without doing micromanagement, right? And then you end up burning out and you lose track of the vision. And he taught me to rely on your people and your employees. Obviously, the rhetoric is customers are person number one, but also, and for the success and longevity of business, is your employees are customer number one, right? And they're humans, and different things affect them, and motivations and courtesy to the customer, and all that service-oriented piece. And I'll elaborate on that little piece more when we start talking about the governor's job. But they both taught me the nuances of that.
I love that you had two different mentors that had different skills, and you kind of took the best away from both of them.
Right. And I think that's also an important trait, to be able to do that, because sometimes the people that are closest to you are probably not your best employees.
Yeah, that's actually very true.
Right.
I know I run and help manage a family business, and it's very challenging sometimes. So
yeah.
I like...
a lot of people will fail to tell you where you're wrong, right? And that's another aspect. That segue on it is I pride myself on this, is not surrounding myself with yes people. And, in creating an environment to where they're comfortable to say no to you, and you act on that.
Yeah.
Without, my wife would probably give you a different opinion on that as far as my
I'll
personality.
have to bring her on here next,
but
maybe.
I think professionally, that's how I try to operate.
I love that. I like that you talk about creating a comfortable environment where people can say no. It's tough, especially being in a seat as governor, people afraid to speak up and want to share their thoughts, especially if it's something that they don't agree with. So let's switch gears now into governor. So
I can give you a perfect example.
Yes.
Before we switch.
Yeah.
So we were going through every business is always dealing with resources availability and enough resources. And any employee that you ever, as a leader, goes down and talks to and says, hey, what can we do to help you with your job? And the number one thing they will say is we need more people, right? But the real answer is we need to be more efficient and utilizing different resources to make us more efficient, and the proliferation of AI, that's a perfect example. But in the police vernacular, we didn't have enough people to respond to accidents on a expeditious or in a timely fashion. Where you're involved in a traffic accident, which is very traumatic to you. You may or may not have been transported to the hospital for an injury, but as you're sitting on the side of the road, you're disrupting your life. And it's important for the police to get there and handle your business as soon as possible, right? And for you to be stuck out there for 3 and 4 hours, it may be the middle of August here in the Las Vegas Valley. We didn't have enough resources because of all the other responsibilities in police work. And so how do you fix it? So if you go to any other jurisdiction in the nation, police do not respond to traffic accidents. The only time they do is if there's injuries, because it's considered an accident and it's property damage versus, a traditional crime. And we at Metro responded to every accident, no matter what level it was, okay? And then we made an arbitrary decision to stop, educate the community and just only go to accidents with injury. And you would have thought we, committed, some heinous crime, violent crime upon the public in general as a result of that, and our customers, the public, they were close to protesting in the street, right? And so you have to be able to say, hey, we screwed up, bad decision, let's rethink this and figure out how we can just do business better. So, perfect example.
Was that the point where you guys ended up hiring people? Because I know that there was a freeze for a long time on hiring police officers, and then that seemed to open up. And I had a lot of friends that actually applied.
No, it wasn't synonymous to that time, but it was how we were recruiting people that was failing us, and so it made us evaluate a better way of that recruitment.
Yeah.
So.
It's interesting.
And the unfortunate piece in law enforcement, the pendulum of support by the community and the public, it sways pretty quick. One day you've got all the support of the community, and the next day you've lost the trust and they don't support you. And an example of that would be ICE. That at the federal level, the community is pushing back on the original intent, and you got to figure out a way to garner that trust back.
Well, and in those roles, it's extremely difficult to honestly please everyone and give the appropriate explanation to get them on board. Right. If you had the time where you could have a one-on-one discussion with every single citizen, then maybe they would understand the thought process. Right. But in roles like that, you don't. You have to make decisions. And
which brings up another point is communication, right? And what we also learned, you described it perfectly, is no matter how much you communicate, there's still individuals not hearing it, right? And no matter what method, form, social media, podcast, whatever it may be, there's still a group of individuals who are never going to hear it.
Mm-hmm. So moving into the governor's seat, you have now a much bigger role and a change in your vision, right? It's not just about the law enforcement agency and how you can make an impact there, but it's now about shaping the future of the state of Nevada. Who or what gave you that bug, that nudge to want to move into going for governor?
There was two. Well, let's start the reason why. Okay, so we were, as a community and as a nation, we're going through post-COVID or even COVID. The current state of mind was COVID and the response to that, and whether you considered the previous governor's response a failure or a success. Either way, I perceived it as a failure in the majority of it, and that was because I felt my predecessor had a lack of understanding of the person that was in the middle of a business, owning a business, or an employee that was affected, and all the nuances of responding to a crisis. And I thought we were doing a poor job of responding to a crisis. And that's what you do as a leader in law enforcement on daily, weekly, monthly basis, respond to a crisis. And how you respond is very important, right? And I thought we could have done a lot better job as a state. But during that process, our fabric, or our foundational economy was going away. And for us to be successful into the future, we got to figure out how do we become more resilient as an economy, versus a discretionary income economy, gaming, and how do we respond to a crisis in a better form outside of just handing out money and then suffering the consequences of that response, into the future. And especially when we talk about education and what occurred in education for the K through 12 students and all that goes along with it. And I said I could do a better job. And, if I had it full intention to run for a third term as sheriff, and then unfortunately, decisions were made based off the proximity and the timing of COVID. And I thought I could do a better job, and and have more of a challenge, which motivates me in developing the fabric or the future foundation of the state of Nevada. You had a bigger influence on a bigger population, and so a lot of the naysayers in that space said, "Well, you don't have the skill set to do that. You're a cop, basically." And what it boils down to, as you progress through that, you get hired for your technical ability. Whatever you're getting hired for, sound operator, sound engineer, videographer, a desk, front desk at a bank, or whatever, a loan officer at a bank. You're hired and trained to have that technical knowledge of that specific item. And as you progress through leadership, that technical piece tends to go lessen and lessen and lessen. That's what that person was hired for. Your job now is to manage the system, give the system direction. So you have to expand your influence soon, or you will fail very fast. And the difference, people say, well, it's different being a cop versus a governor. And I say, no, it isn't, because you're at this level. You're not at this level where you were hired, and it's about managing people and processes. And it's a simple thing. Throw the Sarah model into it and manage people and process through those processes, and rely on them and all the technical knowledge. And so you say the governor as an example. I always equate it to this analogy. The sheriff dealt with, 10 spokes in a bicycle wheel, right? And the governor deals with all the spokes, 100, whatever it may be in the wheel. So it's going in every direction. So you can't have the technical knowledge in all those directions, nor can you have complete understanding. What you got to do is have a modicum of understanding and the ability to tell if your people are being honest with you, and whether they're doing their job to affect that whatever area it is, and whether they are implementing the vision you have for the overall improvement of the organization. And so I had the confidence. And so it's interesting, we're sitting here at Nevada State Bank, and your chairman, Dallas Hahn, who I was very close with through my career as a law enforcement officer, gave me a call one day. He says, you need to think about running for governor. And to be frank with you, I was on the bubble until he called me and influenced me to pull the trigger.
He's good at tapping people on the shoulder.
Yeah.
Yeah, that he knows is qualified for the job.
Well, it goes back to identify your team, right?
Mm-hmm. So being governor, and maybe you can give me a little bit of an education on this, because when you are in a position like that, it's not as simple as you being able to just come in and start making decisions based on what you kind of see might be gaps or issues in the process, right? We talk about people and efficiencies and things like that. What are some of the leadership qualities or things that you have had to possess or honestly evolve in your role as governor to be able to accomplish that, knowing that you have to get buy-in and consensus from so many other leaders that are part of that system?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with you could quantify it in, your types of personalities, right? And, the typical A personality is, you have this mindset, nobody can do it as good as you, and you're a little squeamish about allowing other people to do it, and you stand by and observe it without objecting, and, allowing them to fail, and then, provide them advice along the way, blah, blah, blah. And I had to learn that along the way. And so, and it just by the span of your responsibility, you can't keep that vision or that ability to do that. Because, if you're constantly on top of your employee, getting engaged in their business, they're not going to do their business, right? They're going to let you do it, all right? Or they're afraid to make a decision, right? And so that was something that really I had to work with. I had to take my time and work with it because you get that mindset through the military, that kind of mindset, that warrior mentality. You get that as a police officer. You run to danger versus step back and evaluate, and so all those kind of things. I guess the word is patience that you have to build upon it, and personally realizing what your faults are, and ensure that you are putting people on the team that can help you with your faults. So I think that's what was the difficult piece to wrap your arms around, because it's almost an admittance of weakness, and you got to get past that. The other thing you learn in short order is you want to leave any position you have is that you moved it forward and not backwards, or you were just treading water or not. But you also have to be comfortable in your old skin when you are moving on. And the person that is replacing you, you got to have the attitude that you hope they do a better job than you, right? Because you made the foundation, you hope they do a better job. What I found out from many people is they like to hear, "Oh, we don't like the new guy. We don't like the new guy." The people that he used to have influence on. We miss you and that kind of stuff. And I think that's a failed piece in your ability to move an organization forward. I want the guy that replaced me for sheriff to do a better job than me. That means the police department's doing better. So.
Yeah, progress over perfection.
And it's just like the state, right? There you go, progress over perfection. You succinct it in 2 words or 3 words.
ChatGPT did for me. I got that from ChatGPT, but yeah.
So I mean that's a big deal. When I transitioned from sheriff to governor, I quite often had, a lot of my old friends and employees saying, "Yeah, we really miss you." And I said, "No, you need to help him do a better job than I did." And everybody's better for it. So.
Well, ultimately, a lot of people that are in roles like that, I like to believe that they're there because they truly want to make a difference and to serve,
right,
and to make it better, no matter who is leading the ship, if you will, that they're contributing towards positive movement. As governor, we interview on this podcast, as you know, a lot of businesses. So we just got our survey results, because every year we do an annual small business survey. And one of the survey results actually showed that a lot of small businesses in the state of Nevada, and I've even heard this in past podcast guests, that they feel very positive about the economy last year in 2025, and then also going into 2026. What are some of the things that you can share, plans to help support small businesses, or something that you would want them to know that we're working on as a state?
Well, there's a couple answers there, and first and foremost is your state conducive to business, right? Is it an environment for business? And one of the most important things is does it have a stable regulatory environment? Or is that going to change on an annual basis, or there's always a threat to my business model or ability to, provide goods or whatever my business model is in a state, and when I decided to run for governor, that was one of my platform pieces, to create a business environment that was, the regulatory environment was, the tax environment was stable. Do we have the ability to make government smaller versus bigger? And, the bigger the government gets, the more onerous it gets on the business environment. And, and is the education system robust enough? And can we work on the education system to ensure that we have a sufficient workforce for businesses that we're trying to attract? Does the state as itself have an incentive program that's in competition with every other state in the union that would make it conducive for business? So first and foremost would have been the regulatory environment. So as what I did in that space is I directed each one of my department heads to identify 10 outdated and or inefficient or onerous regulations that prevented the success of small business. And it was a simple exercise, and they came forward with those regulations, and so we put that into a process to either modify, repeal, or leave alone those particular regulations. And as a result, in 3.5 years, we have either modified or repealed over 900 regulations that affect businesses in every faction or different industry. So that creates an environment, right? And then is day one when you got into office, were you trying to push back on tax increases? Were you trying just to maintain the current level, or were you actually trying to lessen the burden? And, taxes are a big deal in decision making, especially for business owners. And we were lessened some. We were able to stabilize some, but more importantly, there was significant amount of tax ideas and tax programs that were brought forward in the last 2 legislative sessions that I would not sign off on the bills. So I think, that's what I made a promise when I got elected, and that's what I did. And so we created an environment of success for businesses that wanted to come here, and the businesses that are currently here, to make it easier on them. The licensing piece is another big deal. Permitting and licensing when you're putting roots here into so are you going to sit on your hands for 2 years waiting for your permit and or license, right? And we ensured that we could streamline that. And I like to call it the white glove service. We have all the resources here in Nevada that would help you help yourself. We direct contacts to all the Chamber of Commerce's, direct contacts to all the business loan resources, the incentives that can be provided through the Governor's Office of Economic Development to make it easier, not that fear of, I'm going to be squandering my first 2 years in this environment trying to get my doors open. And then, and we'll continue to be available even after your doors are open, especially if you're receiving incentives to ensure that you're meeting the obligations of those incentives and help you build upon those obligations as you work through the process.
Yeah, I know that we've had no shortage of obstacles and challenges that we've had to navigate here in just being in Nevada and Las Vegas. Honestly, when I kind of rewind even during COVID and then the stimulus and everything else that's kind of happened along the way, with your term almost over and you going up for re-election, what do you see being carried forward if you're reelected as governor?
Well, being carried forward so now we go through, so we went through the 3 first iterations of regulations. And, for the listening or visual public is every legislative session as they come out with, a dozen or more new regulations because it's a new idea that they can figure out some tax environment to the benefit of the tax coffers. One is to continually push back on that environment. And then 2 is, again, another iteration of proactivity and repeal of additional regulations. Just because we went through it one time doesn't mean we can't go through it again. And on top of that, every legislative session, there's more that come to bear, with the changing of technology, change of environments, changing of, economy, the powers that be think that's a better way to do business. And I disagree with that as a better way to do business. I think I'm a proponent for smaller government and keeping the government out of the way and keeping the government what it's originally intended to do. Quite often the government injects itself into processes and systems and industries that it has no business being in. And so I think it's that we keep the eye on the ball. So as you go into reelect, it's what we promised in the first, 4 years of administration that this is what we would do, and there's no reason to step away from that. Is to continue to chip away until we can get to where we need to be.
Do you?
And more of a found, I said get to where we need to be. The problem with government, it changes every 4 years, right? And you have to ensure that you're putting systems into place that prove success that people won't try to mess with.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what your opinion on the term limits and things that are set in certain seats of government, just because it seems like some of that institutional knowledge sometimes is then gone because of that. And that seems like you starting again at square one, and how challenging that can be.
Yeah, I mean, there's two factors in there. One is term limits, and the other is you have to run for office. So your ability for people to question your job and your performance is through a vote, right? So should that be the only functionality? And then you have the other, concern is term limits. And sometimes people don't know when it's their term limit, but this is self-induced in the statutes. You see a lot of the concern, and more so in the legislative office versus the executive office with term limits. I think that the term limits that were put in place several decades ago in the legislature were very detrimental because we're lucky to get people to put in for that job. I think it's woefully underpaid and it's very onerous for a person to be an individual legislator in state government. And when you have somebody that wants to do it and they're doing a good job, why not let them stay there? And that brain drain is a real thing. Brain drain is a real thing, and quite often is when they're subject to term limits, the person that replaces them will bring up ideas that were brought up years before and said, no, we already tried that, it didn't work. So let's not waste our time on it. So
I think that's a problem with a lot of business leaders, honestly, in every different industry, is there's a significant amount of folks that are kind of sunsetting or moving on, and all that institutional knowledge goes with it. So how do you preserve that content or that information to make sure that you can then call upon it and use it in the future? Well,
you hope you have students of history, and they do when they're in the position. No, I remember that, and or your staff, that you can rely on staff to say, no, this has been tried before. So there's a lot of different aspects you could help to support that system, but the actual decision makers are the ones that decide to put it up for a vote, whether it gets passed or not. And you got to make sure you have good records, right? Good records and the ability to draw on. One thing I learned in short order was, even though I got to the top, I still talk to the people who were there before me and say, what did you do in this situation? And you got to have enough confidence in yourself that it's not showing a weakness. It's actually a strength to be able to get a difference of opinion.
Well, you talk about that earlier, too, with the people that you surround yourself around and making sure that they know they can push back and they can challenge you or they can tell you if something isn't a good idea. Has there ever been a moment where you've had to take a step back because you realize you're digging your heels into a particular topic that maybe you need to stop and think about and be like, wait a minute, I set this room up so that I did start to think about different angles?
Well, yeah, it was you get too close to your idea, and there's no way you want it to fail, right? And so you start to ignore the red flags. And then you got to be comfortable with having your people tell you, hey, you're going in the wrong direction. Hey, this just wasn't a good idea. You could, and it's probably a lot of it is from unintended consequences or the lack of knowledge of the whole issue. And they bring up some and say, well, this is a problem with that idea. And you gotta be strong enough to know, it takes more leadership to say no than it does to say yes.
Yeah, we simulated a legislative session in leadership like just a couple months ago, and I was real surprised on how much information people get. I know that there's obviously a lot of other discussions and meetings that are had well before you actually go through the vote. But I was just fascinated over like, wow, there are a lot of people in the room, a lot of different folks talking to people that are making those decisions and really wanting everyone to understand the ripple effect of every single decision that is made. It doesn't seem like an easy thing to do because you're judged on every decision that you make.
Right.
Good or bad.
Well, I mean, it always goes back to the boss, right? It always goes back to the boss. And, you know, it's an interesting piece is I probably get confronted at least once a week from some constituent that talks to me about some particular issue they're dealing with, and they're asking me to help solve the issue. And I say, you know, that's not in my responsibility. I have nothing to do with that. Well, why can't you fix it? You know, because, you know, you're the governor, you know, the head of government. And no, I could get you to the right person, but that's actually not what I do as a governor. So sometimes it's lack of knowledge, and sometimes it's just, I just need help. Mm-hmm. Nobody's listening to them.
Yeah.
But you're right though. It's it's very difficult to, if you use the legislative process as an example, it's very difficult. You know, we're a part-time legislature here in Nevada. We have a constitutional mandate to start and end after 120 days every other year. And they try to jam a lot of stuff in a small period of time that is very complicated, comprehensive, and wide-reaching. And an example would be last session, there was 1,200 bills presented. 120 days, 1,200 bills. Do you think a bill that's going to change a law or implement a law requires more than 10 minutes of evaluation? Yeah.
And that's all you get.
Yeah, and it has drafting on it and everything else that goes along with it, and you know, then 2 houses of votes, and then an eventual ratification by the governor, and that's unacceptable. You got to be able to triage that as leadership. So.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why you called a special legislative session.
Right.
Do you see that being something that you might have to do a little bit more frequently?
Well, you know, yeah, I wouldn't say frequently. I think, personally, I think that I would be more comfortable if we did 2 sessions, you know, a session each year. You know, one could be a policy session, the other one could be a budget session, because, you know, besides the 1,200 bills, we have to balance. We have to provide a budget and certify a budget for the state, $48 billion, during that same session. So how do you got to separate the responsibility of 1,200 bills in a budget, and that takes a significant amount of time. And you know, I've made that recommendation for this evaluation, but it's never received a vote. You know, even during my tenure and before me. I think as a state, a part-time legislature made sense because it was less government. But that was back when the population might have been 100,000, right? Or less than that. And we're to the level now in the diversity of the economy that has a completely different effect on a lot of different areas that we need to reevaluate that system.
No, I would agree with that. I was just doing a little bit of research just on the time that I've lived in Las Vegas. I moved here in 2003, and the population here was around 500-something thousand, and now we're pushing close to 3 million. And to have infrastructure and everything else not really move at the pace that maybe our population is, it can start to create a lot of significant challenges. And then how do you combat that when you only meet every other year?
Right, and so back to your original question, do we need to have more frequent special sessions? And I think special session as itself is flawed to where you need to have I think it's better to have more regular session so you can do your due diligence. Because as you go into a special session, you know, you want to, the goal is to get in and out of there, because one of the costs that goes along with it which wasn't an original intended cost, the disruption of the legislators' lives and all parts of the government. but are you picking the right things to put into the session? So let's use Texas as a perfect example. I think there's only 6 part-time legislative states, and Texas is one of them. And you're like, wait a minute, you said population. Well, yeah, Texas, how many, what do they have there? 30 million people? I don't know, close to that. And they are constantly in special session, constantly, boom, 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 to where it's almost like they're a full-time legislature. And I think that's a poor way to address the issues.
Mm-hmm. Do you think about your legacy often, or what you want your legacy to be, being governor? Like if Jeremy Aguero were to talk about your impact, what would be some of the things that you'd hope would be mentioned?
Well, when I went into this, we talked about diversifying the economy, and 2, that's the basis of any community's economy. And 2 was the education system. And Nevada has notoriously been identified as having a poor public education system, and ever since I got here, in 1976, and the rankings have always put us in the bottom 10th percentile, and I couldn't figure out why we couldn't change that. And I had made a promise to my constituents and my voters and myself that I wanted to do something significant in both those spaces, both in the economy and its resilience and education, because education, it's synonymous with the economy, right? Both in your workforce and ideas and technology and everything else that goes with it, and quality of life for individuals. And so I guess to boil it down to is I would hope people say I help move both of those issues forward and not backwards.
Well, I think you have. And I really appreciate your time here.
It's a big elephant, right?
Yeah, it is.
And we've taken bites of that elephant, and we got to keep consuming it.
No, exactly. My dad says that.
Analogy,
how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? But you're right. When you have a significant issue and it's ever evolving and changing because our community is changing constantly, that is something that you chip away at over time. And I think that we've made some positive strides there.
You can't change a big, it's hard to turn a battleship quickly, right? And that's no different than the education system and the economic systems and all that. And to make sure that you keep chipping it away, and those chips are moving it forward and not backwards. And so I guess the answer, to boil it down again, is, Nevada has moved forward under Governor Lombardo. Mm-hmm.
And will continue to move forward. Yeah. So my last question, and I ask this of every guest, but what is a guiding principle?
What's my favorite ice cream?
Yeah, well, no, but you could tell us that too. No. What is a guiding principle that you have in business or in life that you want to share with others?
That's a great question. I've never actually been presented that I would never be embarrassed for my actions. In other words, I would be prideful of what I do on a daily basis and what I've asked the people to expect of me. So it's lead from. I said it from the beginning, lead from the front, and I wouldn't do anything I wouldn't do myself. Ask somebody to do something that I wouldn't do myself, and I pride myself on that. So.
Thank you so much, Governor.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you could tell me your favorite ice cream too after this, but thank you so much for tuning in to Through the Door, the insider's perspective on running a business.